Hi there, welcome back to another episode of American Snippets. Some of you may recognize our guest today from any one of the number of major news shows he's on or the TV shows. Perhaps you've been lucky enough to be in an audience when he's spoken or read his book, but he is everywhere. And today he's here on American Snippets, and we are super excited to have this opportunity to speak with Larry Broughton. Larry is a former Army Green Beret. He is a CEO of Broughton Hotels and Broughton Advisory. He is all over the map today. I don't know how he took the time out to schedule with us, but we're so grateful that he did, Larry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Barb. I hope I'm not oversaturated yet.
No. No. Our audience, well, everybody likes to say this, right? But our audience is different. You know, we're kind of like a grassroots, hardcore Americana.
Love it.
And so your story is perfect. We talk a lot about positivity, possibility, and patriotism. You check all of those boxes. Mm-hmm. So it is super fun for us to have you there. And one of the interviews that I did get to hear you do, I mean, right away, your story, I was like, oh my gosh, it's easy for people to look at somebody in a situation and think, oh man, this guy must have had X, Y, and Z fall into place for him. Who gave him that to reach that level, right? But when you reach back and you look into your story, you were 17 years old when you head out.
Yeah, heading out of my parents' place, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've all got stories, right? And
yes.
Well, I've got something going nutty on my computer right now. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
You're back. So I moved out when I was 17. My twin brother and our friend Jack and I, we were all kind of independent. And, it's a lot different than today, right? Where people are still living with mama when they're 35.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was kind of scary at the same time. But listen, it's not like I was living in San Francisco or someplace else, or New York. I was living in pretty rural New York at the time. And that was it.
Which is where we are now. Yeah.
What's that?
We're in rural New York now, Hudson Valley.
Where are you?
We're just past Middletown. We're like a half hour from West Point.
All right, good. Yeah, good. Well, I grew up south of Buffalo near the Pennsylvania border, and it was kind of Calvary Apple Orchard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, I have a son up in Buffalo now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the independence of youth, I think was a great opportunity.
It was a great opportunity. I also have a twin brother, and I can imagine heading out on an adventure with him. And I think there is something about that kind of twin thing. You got the same mindset, right? Like who else in the world would get some crazy notion that you're going to do or wanted and not look at you and say, man, you're crazy, but look at you and say, man, I'm in, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, the older we get, the more similar we realize that we are. He took a different path than I did. Well, it's like lots of relationships, right? Sometimes you're walking side by side. Sometimes you're looking across the football field at each other. Sometimes you can't even see each other, but then you come back. And particularly, I think with siblings, family members, I think especially twins, you're always emotionally connected, right? But we went on the martial arts journey together, in our early days. And he went into the military at the same time I did. We may get onto that topic here today. Yeah. But he's one of my heroes because he was very successful, had a successful medical career after he got out.
Awesome.
Military, but then he realized it's not my passion. I'm going to go back to what my real love is. That's martial arts, which is pretty risky when you go from a medical career, doing really well, having a great successful practice, people driving for miles to come see you, to say, I'm giving that up. I'm going to go do what I love and what I'm passionate about. And that was, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe 10 or 15 years ago now that he did that. And since then, he's done a couple of movies. He's been inducted into several martial arts halls of fame.
What?
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
He's absolutely in love with his life. And so I look at people like that and say,
love it.
That's the way we ought to be living our life, right? When you're doing something you're passionate about and you're good at, it's like a natural strength. Awesome things happen in life. So he's one of my heroes.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to track you down. We're going to get him on too. That's a great story. I love it.
I'll make the connection for you.
We absolutely love those stories. So tell us a little bit about that. We're going to go through the little steps and then we're going to get into some like particular questions that I pulled out that I'm very curious to hear, your answer and your take on. Okay. the martial arts world. How is that? I mean, that has to be super competitive like anything else, but it has to take a high level of commitment and dedication. Do you feel like that was a good preparation for you to make it through the training for special forces?
Yeah, but even before that, I think was just going through a Boy Scouts. It was a great experience, and it's sad to me that I see a great organization like that its membership has dwindled so dramatically. And I think for some reason, I think it's for political reasons, and so that breaks my heart because I think it does a great job of creating young men and women. Now it's I thought that what I loved about that experience is that it taught the basics. Do the basics really well first, and then you get promoted to the next rank. Do those things really well, then you get promoted to the next rank. So you have building blocks, right? And it's the same thing in martial arts. You start as a white belt, basically, or as a nothing belt, knowing nothing, and then you become a white belt, and then you progress through the ranks. And what I realized in martial arts that it wasn't until you attained your black belt, that's when the journey really begins. There's all this preparation at first, but you really start earning once you're a black belt. So I attained black belt before I went into special forces. And so I understood the mindset. I understood sacrifice. And from Boy Scouts, I understood leadership. I understood the dynamics of highly effective teams. But all of that was amplified once I got into special forces. And so, yes, the selection and assessment phase was a pain in the rear. The actual qualification course was really tough, but the learning really happened once I got to the A teams. So it's funny how life, everything is incremental, but I think sadly nowadays so many people want, and my son included, I love my son, adore my son, but he's of that mindset. He wants to be an expert now.
Yeah.
Right. He wants to be not world famous, but I mean, he wants to go from zero to be the best lacrosse player without doing work. I want to be the best drum player, but I don't want to practice,
Right.
So I don't know if that's the advent of the internet or what it is, but we see experts all around us, or we see people that are really good all around us. But what we don't see is the pain, the suffering, the struggle that happened before the fame.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, you look at me and it looks like, oh, I've got it all together. But oh no, there are a lot of years of scraping along the bottom, lots of bruises and bloody, broken bones, in order to get.
Yeah. And your story, and like I said, I did have the chance to just hear a couple of your interviews, and I love that you are willing to be so open and honest about it. I know it's difficult to do. You had a couple things in there that, that I could relate to when you got later on, and then you hit some hard points. But so talk about then after your military career, right? Well, first, was there any moment that you're willing, talking about that you had during your service that struck you, that left an impact on you, that maybe made you like more committed to your service, or thinking it was time to go?
Maybe? Oh, yeah. Good question. Wow. I've never been asked that before. So listen, I think that what I've learned over the years is that camaraderie. Now, I've only spent time, besides basic training and jump school, I never spent a day in the conventional military. So my entire career, whatever it was, I spent over 8.5 years on Special Forces A teams. Wow. The rest of it, so I don't know the conventional military very well, except by working with them or supporting them. Right. But on a Special Forces A team, the camaraderie is so strong. The thing I guess I learned that when I left the military, I was not intentional for years about building strong bonds, particularly with men. And we need that, because when the going gets tough and the chips are down, we need to have people that we can lean on. And I didn't have. There was one phase in my life where I had isolated so much that basically my world crashed down. I had nobody to reach out to, I thought, at the time. So that was a key thing. What led me to get out, listen, I traveled around quite a bit, and this is kind of insight in just the way my brain works. Mm-hmm. I started getting kind of an inkling for public policy and politics as we had traveled. And I started seeing the way some of these knuckleheads were running countries. And I just said, well, crying out loud, if they can do it, I can do it. How hard can it be? Right. And that's kind of my philosophy on everything in life. If someone else has done it, it can be done.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, and so my brother and I, what we used to say, in martial arts 100 years ago is only those who can see the invisible can do the impossible. And that's really kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, be able to visualize it. If you can't visualize it, it's not going to happen, right? And so as we were traveling around, I saw some of these knuckleheads who were running these countries. I thought, well, gosh, how hard can it be? So I thought I was going to get out. And so I did. I got out with the intention of studying political science and maybe getting into the political arena somehow, maybe get into the State Department. I wasn't really quite sure, but I knew I wanted to play in a bigger stage, I guess. And so I decided to get out and go to school. I barely graduated high school. I was not a very good student. It turns out I'm dyslexic. But when I took the ASVAB, I scored really well on that, and ended up getting in. They said, "Well, listen, you can try out for Special Forces." And so I said, "Sounds good. Let's try it."
Let's try it. So, when did you just discover that you're dyslexic?
Not until I got into the military.
Unbelievable. So, I mean, do you look back now, or it's a waste of effort, right, to look back? But did it help kind of click things into place with you, like, oh, this is one reason I struggled so hard,
Barb, you have no idea. I grew up being told and thinking that I was a dummy.
Oh, it's awful.
No way I was going to go to college. I've shared this story a few times, so some of you may have heard this before, but when you're like in 8th or 9th grade, and you're going to talk to your high school guidance counselor, and they're going to guide you through.
Yeah.
And maybe it was like middle of my freshman career, and freshman year. And so I sat down with her and she said, "Well, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I wanted to be a veterinarian." And she literally chuckled and said, "Honey, you're not smart enough to be a veterinarian. But
my goodness.
But if you want to work with animals, we can get you into FFA, Future Farmers of America." And here's this adult authority figure who's supposed to really have their stuff together and know about learning disabilities and everything else. When they tell you, "Honey, you're not smart enough," the message to me is, I'm not smart enough.
Yeah.
It didn't stop me from still doing things, but I realized if I wanted something, I was going to have to fight for it. It was going to have to be really strong. And so I just learned over the years, if it's worth having, then it's worth fighting for, right?
Yeah.
And things aren't going to come easy. But no, I didn't know until, so I just struggled through. Honestly, if I'm being honest, I cheated my way through high school. I copied people's papers. Yeah. I got busted cheating on a social studies test. One time, I don't think I've ever said that out loud.
It's crazy how you remember that stuff, right?
Well, there's a message there, isn't there?
Yeah.
If you've ever been through a recovery program, they say you got to let that stuff go. This is why you write this stuff out, right?
Right.
But I believe me, I've thought about it. I've never said it publicly before, but I remember Mrs. Merriman, I think was her name, busted me cheating on a social studies test because I knew. So Barb, on my SATs, when I took the SATs or any of those Scantron tests with the bubbles, I just made designs on them. With the little bubbles. I knew if I answered the questions, I wasn't going to do very well. So it was that bad. Yeah. But now, I was diagnosed. I went through a training program, learned how to read much better.
Yeah.
I learned good.
And then you wrote a book. I learned good.
Yeah. So now I'm an avid reader.
That's amazing.
I write articles. I write books all the time. Listen, it's not an easy task. I don't sit down. It takes extra time, but it's worth it. And I think that any of your listeners will learn, if you want to get clarity of thought, the best thing you can do is to write.
Yes.
And get as succinct as you can.
Yep.
So it's a great process.
Yeah, I love that. And, I'm a writer, so I agree with you, right? And writing could do so many things. I think just the act of going from your head into your hand, onto paper or your laptop or whatever it is, it's an intentional act, and then you see it and it just reinforces and forces you to dwindle it down. So totally great. So then after the military, you're then there. I know a lot of veterans come out, and they have kind of lost a sense of purpose. And I think there's a lot of people in life who have something happen in their world, some shift or some change or some loss where they lose their purpose. And it's a very dangerous place for somebody to be. How did you get through that point? You said, to move forward.
It was very difficult. I moved to San Francisco, and I had a friend who was living there, and he had an apartment in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. If anybody knows the Tenderloin, it is a nasty,
Oh no.
and it still is, I guess. It's kind of a funky place to live. And I'd been out for, I don't know, maybe 6 months at this point and just felt totally lost. I had no connection with people. Again, I was living in the ghetto in San Francisco, or one of the ghettos, or really grimy areas. And I remember being up on the rooftop of this little apartment building. Well, little, it's probably a 6-story building. Not ashamed to say, I broke down in tears. Like, what the hell have you done? You had this sense of belonging and purpose.
Yeah.
And now you're working with drug dealers and pimps and prostitutes in the Tenderloin at a night at a little no-tell motel. What have you done? And so I felt pretty desperate. And I started doing some pretty nefarious stuff, like rummaging through friends' medicine cabinets and finding Percocets and Vicodin and, stupid stuff, Not proud of it, but I'm saying it as a point of, it was not fun for a long time. But over time, it wasn't like that things changed. But yeah, things changed. I started getting connected with people, and I started school at this point and really started loving. I started taking political science classes right away. I started going to a junior college and really started fueling my mind, I stopped working out when I first got out of the military. So I went back to the gym, started working out. I got intentional about living.
There you go. Yeah.
And things started to turn for me. And, it was up and down for years until several years ago. But it was a process. Back then when I got out, in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't the support systems, I don't think, back then. They didn't have the formal TAPS program, the Transition Assistance Program that they've got now. And I just don't think there was the awareness. I mean, we were still in an odd way. Technically we're in peacetime. Right. We were still in this post-Vietnam era, Panama had happened, Grenada had happened, the nonsense in Lebanon and Iran-Contra, all that stuff was going on, or it had happened. So we were in technical peacetime. There's still activity, particularly for the special operations community, but it's not like it is now, where there's the awareness.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So,
yep.
Yeah. I mean,
veterans in the military weren't even on the radar. Like nobody.
No. Listen, I didn't tell anybody anything that I was in the military. People didn't know.
You didn't tell people.
Didn't even tell people. Well, listen. I love San Francisco. I lived there for 14 and a half years or 14 years. Not the hotbed of welcoming in our veterans.
Yeah.
At the time. I know it's different now, but nobody wanted to hear, that I was a veteran. Now you see veteran-owned businesses. You see people on LinkedIn pages say I'm a veteran. I do the same thing now, right? Back then there wasn't we didn't embrace vets like we do now.
Yeah. So what would you then maybe offer as words to a veteran now coming out who is in that gap between purpose? He's, in between purposes, and falling into that.
Yeah, good question. So the great thing is I live in that world now. I live in the world of transitioning vets. I do everything I can to help vets find their purpose through leadership and entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
Suggesting that every veteran ought to be a leader or entrepreneur, because we have knucklehead veterans, just like we have any knuckleheads throughout every segment of society, right? But we are certainly better prepared than our peers. So if you take a 25-year-old vet and a 25-year-old non-vet, it's very likely that the vet has been tested, that their mettle has been tested, right? That they've really had some leadership, they've real world challenges and experiences that they've had to deal with. And so I think that there's, what I encourage them to do is, if you don't know what you're doing with your life and you feel lost, just serve. Find something where you can serve other people, even if you just serve your brother and sister veterans, because there's an affinity group there. It's easy to find veteran groups now, you know. And so affinity groups are really important. Whether you're a business leader that you're trying to launch a product, find your affinity group. They're more likely to buy from you. When you're trying to start your speaking career, find your affinity group. Go speak to them. If you're feeling lost, find your affinity group. Connect with them. But so many ways to serve today. And you don't have to become a volunteer at the homeless shelter. You don't. How about these little tiny things? If you see someone struggling in a parking lot putting groceries in their car, help them.
Yes.
You know, if you see somebody struggling putting their luggage into the overhead bin on an airplane, help them.
Yeah.
Those little things over and over again, done consistently, does something to your insides. The world, the universe, Gaia, God rewards that kind of stuff, you know, and you feel better about yourself. So I would just say, if you're having difficulty transitioning, find some way to serve, but do not squirrel up. Don't isolate. That is the worst thing you can do, is isolate.
It is. And and I know that from my own experience, and I know that you've been through it as well. So, and I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, if that's okay. So then you found your way through that tough time, which I also applaud, because I know people, you know, personally who were in that path and did not find their way out and destroyed their life and a lot of other lives in the process. Yeah. And so sadly, I know that. Yeah.
Sadly, a lot of us know.
Yeah.
Probably all of your listeners know someone. Through to the other side.
Yeah. And so it always makes me happy when I see somebody who makes it through.
Me too.
For that person.
That's my heart. And it's one of the reasons why I speak about it publicly. Because I didn't know anybody. You know, I didn't know people when I had been at my deepest, darkest times. I didn't know anyone else who had been through it before. Yeah. We didn't have podcasts and interviews like this.
No.
I was going through. People didn't write that much about failure and addiction, and you know, it just wasn't. The internet wasn't as popular.
It wasn't cool. Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And so I too applaud people who have found their way through, because a lot of people still don't.
Yeah. No. And so it's good. So there's another box to check where Larry has something to teach people. Jeez, crushing it, and we're not even halfway through. Okay, so you make it out of your military service, and you battle your way through those troubles. Then you find that first job that led you down the path where you are. What can you talk about that?
Sure.
That job?
So when I started going to school, I really wanted to get into the political arena. And so I started volunteering on different political campaigns. I didn't really know what political party I was in. And so I was volunteering on, presidential campaigns and local campaigns on both sides of the aisle. And really realizing I don't fit either one of them. They're idiots.
I'm out.
They're dogmatic. They're not practical. They're not pragmatic. And I'd hear some of these politicians talking about foreign policy, and they've never been out of their, not technically, but out of the country, out of the state. They've never seen the world firsthand, and it used to drive me bonkers. But I continued with that, and but during this whole time, my first job was as a night auditor at a little no-tell motel in San Francisco. And it was literally a pay-by-the-hour place when I got there, but it paid me a whopping $5 an hour. Went in at 11 o'clock at night, got up at 7 o'clock in the morning. The job really only took a couple of hours, the technical part of the job. And so I spent the rest of the time doing homework and getting ready for school the next day.
Yeah.
And so it served a purpose. Plus, the apartment that I was living in, if you call it an apartment when I first moved there, it was a tiny studio apartment. There were 3 of us living there. And so I worked at night so that when the other 2 guys were gone out working during the day, I slept, during the day while they were.
Yeah.
So it was a pigsty. But anyway, so after being there in this job as a night auditor for, 8 months probably, an investment group came in to buy this little no-tell motel to turn it around, convert it into what ended up becoming what's considered one of the first boutique hotels in the country. And and so the young managing member of this investment group was only 18 months older than I was. He was a young Stanford MBA grad. And we kind of hit it off. We were from opposite sides of the track, is what we used to call it, where I grew up. Like I was like literally, on one side of the track, and the rich people were on the other side. And so his father was a Stanford MBA grad as well, and they put together a great investment group. And so they renovated this property, and I was kept on and became a manager at the place. And I started realizing that the hotel industry kind of met a lot of my needs. Now, it didn't hurt for sure that I was working in this dysfunctional work unit where without any real leadership, no one was inspiring anybody. Because literally, like one guy who worked the 3 to 11 shift before me was a heroin addict and dealer. Okay. Yeah. The guy who worked the 7 to 3 shift was on probation for being a pimp. The general manager, rest his soul, became a good friend of mine, was an alcoholic, barely functioning, right? Yeah. There was no kind of outward redeeming qualities about this cast of characters.
No.
I was barely functioning, right? But anyway, so based on I had real world leadership experience, and I was willing to work that crazy shift, I was kept on, became a manager at this company, and ultimately I became a partner in the company, and we ended up acquiring about 14 hotels over about a 14-year period. And I learned a lot because here's the funny thing about the hotel industry. It's got real estate, finance, team building, did I say leadership, marketing, all kinds of stuff, right? And so with my kind of schizophrenic, bright, shiny object personality, there were all kinds of things that got me interested in it. And so at the same time, I was realizing either I don't have thick enough skin or I don't have the patience for the political arena, right? So I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on this hotel thing, and I ended up making it a career. And then it got to be about the late 90s, and I was making a great deal of money. I had gotten married in the late 90s, and I'm since divorced, but at the time, my former spouse was working as many hours as I was, crazy hours. We were trying to start a family. Yeah. And so we finally just said, you know what? We don't need to work this hard. We have all this money coming in from the hotel company. Let's kind of semi-retire and move to Santa Barbara, where we both loved. And we did that, and we started our family. So it was an interesting journey, but I ultimately didn't do that. I didn't do the hotel space for about a year and a half, probably. Bought a couple of restaurants in Santa Barbara, but quickly got back into the hotel industry because I just missed it so much.
But so it sounds like you'd had so much life experience before then, and then you get to this place and you're still young, on the young side, and you get to retire well before, soft retire, before most people even have that R word in their head. It would seem like you got to the point in life where, okay, I made it, done, I worked hard, everything came out the way it was supposed to, and I'm in. And that can be a good place to be in, but I think it can also be a vulnerable place to be in because you're not prepared if something crashes, or maybe you allow things. Yeah.
What I realized I needed was this rest.
Yeah.
I didn't need to retire. I needed
retirement. Yeah.
I've never taken time off. For my first job, I was a dishwasher during high school at a restaurant. Then I started working at McDonald's, doing the martial arts thing at the same time while I was working at McDonald's. Went right into the military, like not taking a day or a week off in between any of these things.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It was never, and I'd never even really taken any kind of significant real vacations, right? And so, I think I just needed a rest. I needed a break. I needed to kind of regroup. And so, so that's kind of what I did. But then the interesting thing is when I finally officially launched my hotel company in 2001, it was a pretty rough time. I put the first hotel into escrow in November of 2000. Didn't even really have my hotel company formed. Closed escrow in January of 2001. And if people can think back to that time, it was the .com bomb.
Yeah.
That just blew up, led to a national and a global recession at the time. So people weren't traveling.
Mm-hmm.
All of the money that was coming in from me was from my investments in our hotels at my former company, all in San Francisco. But then SARS hit. I don't know if anybody remembers the avian flu. SARS.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Splash back, right?
Yeah.
What impact did that have on you? Because that was in Asia, right? Well, a third of our revenue, or a third of the travelers to San Francisco, were from Asia. Right?
Wow, who thinks?
Already down, and then Asians stopped traveling, and so our investments in San Francisco, the hotels that we had in San Francisco at the time, lost value of about 45% in that 1 year period.
Ouch.
And so I went from I used to get distribution checks, right, where profit, you're an owner, you're getting distributions, right? But that flipped. All of a sudden, I got to start writing capital call checks, which means we can't make payroll. Mortgage needs to be paid, and we don't have the money. Okay, owners, buck up with the capital.
Up. Yeah.
So things started flipping very quickly, and I didn't have the money to do it. I was building a hotel in San Francisco, or in Santa Barbara. Had staff to pay payroll for. Had a hotel out in Palm Desert that we are renovating. Needed money for that. It was pretty rough, and then 9/11 hit.
Yeah.
And it turned into, like, people in the business community, particularly in the travel industry, turned into like The Walking Dead. It was rough. It was rough. So that was a very, very, very difficult time in my life. And that was probably one of the deepest, darkest seasons of my life. Yeah.
And all those ripple effects that you don't think of. And in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, or these immediate moments, especially for the people who were directly impacted, it could be hard. My husband, he was one of the first National Guard on the scene at 9/11 that day. And, that started the beginning of what was the end for us. But it can be hard for people who are so emotionally and personally and physically impacted by an event to be able to look up from that giant, dust plume and see that dust reaches all the way over there to somebody in an own, different way. And I think looking back all these years later, I think a lot of us are only just now beginning to understand the overarching impact of that day, and that a lot of people.
That is so well put, Barb. I totally agree. And for me, it took a long time. And it wasn't until a few years ago, after my divorce, where I started to realize that it was 9/11. I did not get deployed after 9/11. I was a civilian at that point. I remember the day that it happened. We had just opened our hotel up in Santa Barbara, and my wife and then baby was there. She was only a few months old, and I saw it happen on TV. They were still sleeping, and I remember walking back to the guest room where she was sleeping, because I knew I was going to have to tell her. As I was walking back, it's like, I'm going back in. I've got to go enlist. I have to do it, or re-enlist. I have to do it. And so I remember telling her about it, and like she was in total disbelief and shock, like most of us were. Yeah. And when I told her I'm going back in, she goes, absolutely not. You are not going back in. And she meant it, Yeah. You've got a wife now. You have a daughter. You're not going back in. There are other people who can do that.
Right.
And I fought with her for a while, for a few days about it. And then I said, she's probably right. But I'll tell you, we never talked about it after that. And I carried that resentment towards her, which is bad, for years. And I never really processed it until a few years ago, that was one of the things that was always under the surface that I could never verbalize. Yeah. So there was the guilt, that I didn't go back in while I had brothers who were my age going back in. But my wife wouldn't let me, And so I was blaming her when really I should have been blaming myself, or I should have talked it through, or done something, right? So you're right. The ripple effects are crazy in ways that we can't even fathom, but we have to be intentional about, I've used that word 3 times, I think, so far. Yeah. So maybe that's the theme of today's talk.
That's it, being intentional.
Yeah.
Larry Broughton, there you go.
Exactly. But I got to be intentional. If I want to live a healthy life, I have to stop, breathe, and think. That's a tough thing to do.
Yes.
For most of us, right?
Yeah.
So it was a very difficult season, and financially, of course, it just it led to me having about $84 in the bank, and me not having a network of people around me.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult. My wife left with my young baby in December of that year because of some nefarious, stupid stuff that I had been doing. Not sharing with her the reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, it was a wake up call for me, and so I ended up having kind of this moment of I knew I just needed to surrender to the world. Like, my best efforts got me here. I've got $84 in the bank. My life is in the toilet. My wife has left me. I don't know how to pay payroll. What the hell am I going to do? And so I ended up hearing in my head, this, like, literally, there are probably some listeners who can relate to this. I literally pulled out my life insurance policies, calculated up all my net worth, and realized I'm worth more dead than alive. That's what it got down to, right?
Yeah.
And it was, thank goodness, I didn't actually go through with what I had been thinking at the time. But what I had to end up doing is just surrendering to the universe and to myself and say, I got to reach out. I had been pretending to the world that I had it all figured out, that I knew that I was the smartest guy in the room. I started believing my own press, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped having mentors in my life. I stopped going to a mastermind that I used to belong to. I had zero accountability partners. I was just a free agent flying solo. And I realized, listen, snipers have sniper buddies. You have swim buddies. Everybody, no one does anything in the military by themselves. Nobody.
Yeah.
And here I am trying to think, I'm taking on the business arena by myself. I'm not that.
Crazy. Yeah.
Right? So anyway, thank goodness things turned around, and I humbled myself and started actually asking for help.
That is good. I think that's another important message. I mean, I don't know too many people who haven't been at some level of their life where they needed help. I didn't reach out. And I had, one of my own version of that moment. I can remember sitting in my bedroom after, like, a couple of days after my husband had been killed, and I could hear my 4 little boys out in the living room with my mom laughing, and I was crying and holding that pill bottle, and I'm like, they're better off without me. I can't raise them. They deserve better and all that. But, I hear this voice and obviously, I don't do it. And then I didn't fully invest in my own life, but I had my 4 accountability partners built in, who demanded that I at least show up. So I think for people who don't, I think that's a huge point. It's for the people that don't have some driving for something compelling them to kind of anchor them on this side or they feel that disconnect where they don't feel that is an anchor anymore. It can be huge. And so what was it for you? You found that, like, you had that moment in your head, and I want to just dig into this for a minute because I know there are people listening who are in that dark time and they don't want to reach out to people. I know what it was for me that got me to reach out, but what was it for you that took you from that thought, like, hey, I need to reach out, to actually taking that step and reaching out?
So I have to get focused here, or else I'm going to lose it. Okay. So what it was for me is, I remember, this is so silly in some ways. So
it's going to be great. Yeah.
My former spouse and I were total dog people. We had this dog named Madison and another dog named Abraham, a Rhodesian Ridgeback and a boxer. And I remember with Madison, our boxer, I remember saying to her when we were trying to get pregnant, do we really want to get pregnant? Really? I mean, are we ever going to love anything as much as we love Madison? Really? Come on. Is that even possible? Like, that was the conversation. I really didn't know how love. I really didn't. I was inept in that area.
Yeah.
And so I remember when my daughter was born, and I was there, and the story, how the Grinch stole Christmas.
Yeah.
When I saw my daughter, it was literally like my heart grew 2 sizes.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what unconditional love was. None. Zero.
Yeah.
I knew that I would, do whatever I could for any of my veteran buddies or any of my team members in special forces. I loved my team members in special forces more than I loved my family.
Yeah.
Right? And I didn't have that any longer, but when I was literally on my knees and hearing this, surrender repeating in my head, which I didn't even know what that word was at the time. Like, what? Effing no way. Here.
It's a different kind of surrender. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But what I realized is that there's strength in surrender. This kind of surrender. It takes courage to surrender.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Because we hang on to things out of fear.
Yeah.
We want to control things out of fear. And when I realized that my best efforts got me there to that point where I'm on my knees, where I have no business people, nobody who's smarter than me in my organization, I had no mentors. That was because of me, not because of anything else. And I thought, and I did that mental math that a lot of people do. Okay, if I end it today, I won't be putting my family through it. But what I realized, I now have this daughter who I realized I had an inkling of what real love could be. And all of a sudden it hit me about this multi-generational impact of me doing good or bad, right? Of me being around or not, like multi-generational impact. And
that ripple effect, that dust cloud. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so, yes, I for some people, I get that the darkness gets so bad. I get it. I get it. I understand it. But I said, all right, if ever there was a time for you to be a warrior and fight, now is it. Now is the time.
Love it. Yeah.
So I got up, and back then we had Rolodexes. Okay.
Oh yeah. I know what those are.
or little Franklin planners. And so I started saying and admitting what I'd done. Like, I am trying to build this company. I have no idea what I'm doing. I am in the weeds. I am undercapitalized. I'm over leveraged. I don't have money to pay payroll. I need mentors. I just need help. Are you willing to help?
Yeah.
The nonsense I told myself prior to this is like, if anybody knows the position you're in, they're not going to trust you anymore. They're not going to like you anymore. They're going to think that you're stupid. Whatever the negative chatter was going on in my mind, the pain I was feeling at that moment was worse than the embarrassment that I had prior. And I knew that for my daughter's sake, for this kind of glimmer, this vapor of an image of how my life could be, for that sake, I needed to one more time just reach out to people. And so I did. And the funny thing is, people said, yeah, I'll help. Isn't that crazy? Right?
Wait a minute, you said yes? Wait, and,
exactly.
And then you're totally like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with that.
Exactly.
I thought you were going to say no.
Exactly.
Now what?
Well, then I had a mentor finally when I shared this with him. He said, okay, if someone came to you in the position that you were in, would you kick him to the curb or would you help him? Well, I said, of course I would help. And he said, how are you different? Are you that much better or that much worse than anybody else that's out there?
Love it.
Right? And so it really taught me about the power of asking for help, right? About anything. And there's very little that any of us do, very little, good or bad, that someone else hasn't done before, right?
Yeah.
And haven't you noticed that when you go out and buy a new car, all of a sudden you look around and everybody's got the same car that you have?
Yes. Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's not like there were more of those cars that car had never been out there before, rarely, right? But when you finally admit, I've got an addiction, I've got a sexual problem, I got a domestic problems, my business is failing. You mention all of a sudden, I do too. Same thing. Yeah. How can we help each other?
Yeah.
I think there's great value in that. So that really turned things around. And sure enough, as you kind of alluded to, there was someone who said, yeah, I'll help you. In fact, I've got a couple of hotel deals and I need help on. Will you talk to me about them? And all of a sudden I went from making no money to all of a sudden I had an income, and steady income. And so that really gave me some breathing room. But it took me asking for help.
Which is a really hard thing to do for a lot of us.
It takes courage.
Yeah, it does, to kind of humble yourself and submit to that whole, well, you think you're humbling yourself, but you're really not. I mean, it's that whole mindset you got to get out of.
Well, here's the thing that you need to realize. When you ask for help, you move closer to your fullest potential. When you live your life closer to your fullest potential, you're helping other people out. Had I ended it that day on December 4th, back then in 2001, I have now touched, without exaggeration, through the books, through the speaking, through the TV, millions of people. with a positive message about entrepreneurship and leadership, right? That would have ended.
Yeah.
I would not have built a great legacy for my daughter and my son. It's life changing when you realize and by the way, I can easily connect with people now because I share their story. I've been there too.
Yes.
And I had tons of people come up and said to me and said, I never would have told my story had you not told yours.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
That makes all the difference.
Yeah, it does.
All the difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, you went from that. So where is give people an oversight of your businesses today to what you've built today? You have how many hotels and you have this advisory?
Yeah, so we're pushing 20 hotels at this point, and most of them are in California. We have 4 in Chicago. We've signed a couple of really great deals in the last couple of months where we'll probably 4 years from now, we'll probably be pushing 50 hotels.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. So I do that. I do a lot of public speaking on leadership, entrepreneurship, team building, defying the odds kind of stuff. I get a big kick out of that because why do I do that? Well, because I absolutely bombed a couple of times giving keynote speeches. I was absolutely fearful of it and bombed in a big way in very public settings. And here's a lesson for people. After I bombed the second time, so I bombed twice in a matter of 3 days, 3 days. I went to my assistant at the time, her name was Katie, and said, Katie, I need you to give me 30 talks in 30 days.
Oh man, I'm going in. Yeah.
I said, I don't care whether I'm talking to a Girl Scout troop, a prayer breakfast at Denny's, leadership summit. I need to be at 30 talks in 30 days. And she did it. And there were some days where I didn't have anything, but there were Fridays I remember where I would do a prayer breakfast, a lunch meeting at the Chamber of Commerce, an evening mixer at the Business Council in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And what I learned during that process was I had to find my own voice. Mm-hmm. When you do 30 talks in 30 days, you don't have time to prep some new keynote that I'm going to. What I was doing is I was copying everybody else. I was copying what they were doing on stage. I was copying the inflection in their voice and their cadence and how they walked and how they read their speech and all that kind of stuff. And I said, that all goes out the window and I'm going to get real. I'm going to be authentic. Because when you just show up who you are, love me or not, I don't care, but I'm going to talk to you about my story. And so that really helped. And so I do a lot of keynote speeches. I do consulting on the same topics I've been talking about for small businesses all the way up to, Fortune 50 organizations and even the Pentagon. And I've got a coaching and mentoring program for entrepreneurs. I write books, articles. It's hard for me to sit still.
I just do everything.
No.
Yeah, I know.
Here's the thing. I realized, here's the word again, when you get intentional about then it's easy to do stuff. But if you're just a leaf on the wind, and I get the pace of my life is not for everybody, but the pace of my life is perfect for me. Mm-hmm. I love what I do. I love the impact that I'm making. Are there sacrifices? Absolutely, there are sacrifices. But that's what life is. Life is about pain and sacrifices and how we respond to it. Once we accept that and say, it's not fair that I'm struggling all the time. How about just embracing the struggle? Sorry, I know that's not going to sit well with a lot of viewers here. No, but we have to do that.
Yeah, it's true. That's so funny. I was just going to ask you, for a tough love truth that people don't want to hear, but will help, and that was it. Right there.
Embrace the suck. How about that?
Yeah, embrace the suck. Man, that is true. The harder you run from it, the more power you give it, I think. You got
I think that so many people, one of the things I like to say is reality is your friend. Yeah. Just accept it. Accept reality. But so many of us, Barb, get sucked into chasing success.
Yes.
Because what? You go on Instagram, you go on any social media, and people are showing their fancy cars and their watches, and they're flashing money in front of you. And look how successful I am. And I can tell you that was my MO for a short period of time. Look at me, look what I'm doing. And I did think that part of my life was a zero-sum game. If someone else was winning, it meant that I was losing. And I love to win, but I despise losing. Yeah. Okay. And so back then I thought, well, that's no good. And so I just chased it. burned through a relationship because of it, marriage, let's be specific. Almost lost my kids because of it. And it took that hitting bottom when that happened, whatever that was, almost 9 years ago, for another awakening, right? And I realized if you want success, stop chasing it.
Yeah.
Stop it. But instead, seek a life of significance. How can I serve my family? How can I serve my team members? How can I serve my community? How can I serve my place of worship? How can I serve the barista in my favorite coffee shop, right? When you start serving and seeking significance, success is the byproduct of it. That's a hard truth. Stop chasing success. Reality is your friend.
It is. And I remember being in this terrible, terrible, terrible spot 2 or 3 times in the past 13 years, and people would say things like that to me. And I would want to just get them out of my house, out of my life. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying. What do you think I'm trying to do? I would just get nasty with them. So I'm like, well, what the hell do you think I'm trying to do? Idiot. Yeah, but it's freaking true, man. It's true. It's, there is such power in that. And that's the hard, it's like against instinct. It's like when you're climbing something, you got to reach that next thing. You're so afraid to let go where you are, right? Because you think you're going to fall and you're like, you're crazy. I'm not jumping that, but you have to.
This is one of those situations. I don't know if you've ever watched Seinfeld, but there's a character in Seinfeld, George Costanza, right? And there's an episode George. So, the typical George had no luck with women, no luck with work. He was always the dour, dopey loser. Yeah. And so George one day decides he's going to do everything against normal George would do. So he's the anti-George. And all of a sudden, he's got women who are chasing him. He's getting promotions at work, right? So he was going against his instinct, right? That's what this is about. You got to go against your instinct when it comes to this stuff. You have to surrender. You have to ask for help. You got to humble yourself. That's what people are attracted to. Because you know why? Because they can relate to it. People can't relate to the people who have never failed. We all have failed. We've all had, made mistakes. We've all had blunders. We all have skeletons in our closet that we hope that no one ever finds out about, right? Yeah. All you put out there is this positive, fake stuff. People can't relate to it. Yeah. So people will want to help you if you just get real.
Totally. All right. I know we're running out of time.
I'm sorry. I'll ramble.
No, that's okay. I don't want to take your time. There's so much. I could talk to you all day. So we talk a lot here. Part of the big reason we started our whole American Snippets is because it was starting to bother us so much deeply and personally that everybody kept talking about how doomed this country is. You suck, you suck, you suck. We all suck and this country's doomed and the American dream is dead. And I was like, no, that's not what my family gave so much for. It's not what all yours do either. So we believe in the American dream very strongly. We love to feature people like you who have found it. No matter what the odds you're up against, you find it and you help others do the same. But then we also like to ask you, what does that actually mean to you? What does the American dream? How do you define that?
Yeah. This is so corny and cliche probably, but it's freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom to do whatever the hell I want. Yeah. Especially if I'm serving other people, serving my family, and not intentionally hurting other people. So I'm a big believer in free speech. I don't care whether you're a friggin' Nazi or not. I will not like you, but I want your voice to be heard. The more I allow people to talk, the more we have dialogue like this. I'll tell you, I went on a podcast in New York a while back. And not to be boastful, but typically when I do podcasts or interviews, people get pretty good responses. They connect to it, right? Yeah. But this podcaster did not like some of the stuff that I was saying because I just disagreed with her about how women are totally exploited by the patriarchy. I was like, women are powerful. That men have been fighting for women for decades. Yeah. Roe v. Wade was all men and the Supreme Court, men in Congress, women's suffrage, men fighting for women. I listed all these things and she didn't like it. And she tried to basically shut me down and didn't want to hear it and never aired the podcast.
Oh, no.
Yeah. My thing is this. Well, why? Because she didn't like that I had a dissenting voice.
Wow.
I love dissenting voices.
I do too. I find it fascinating.
Let's talk about it. Let's have fun.
Yeah.
we can talk about it. It doesn't mean I need to choke you out, and you don't need to choke me out.
Right.
I love freedom to do what I want, the job I want. I've been to Bali a bunch of times, in Indonesia. We used to have a couple of hotels there, and that's still a caste system.
Yeah.
Okay? So if your grandfather was a stone carver, your father was a stone carver. You are a stone carver. That whole society is being turned on its head, though, right now because of the hospitality industry.
Cool.
Generations ago, people weren't born into the hospitality.
Yeah.
My father didn't work in a hotel, right? We're not like that here in the US. You really do have, if you're willing to bust your tail, and it's so much easier nowadays with the internet, podcast, YouTube, right. You really can get a basic understanding of anything that you're interested in to find out, hey, is this something that I want to pursue? So, I mean, freedom. I just love that we've got freedom, particularly freedom of speech, because most countries around the world, I think we're the only country, somebody can correct me, I think we're the only country in the world where freedom of speech is a constitutional amendment.
Love it. And you're one of the people we have to thank for that. So thank you.
A small part for me, geez.
So if people want to find out more about you, follow you, get more information on how to book you or buy your book, where can they go?
Well, like you said earlier, I'm everywhere.
Yes, you are.
I'm on all the social media platforms. Instagram is kind of my preferred one, and you can just DM me there. But it's just like at Larry Broughton on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. But Instagram is probably the fastest way through. But I've got a website. It's larrybroughton.me. larrybroughton.me. If people want to see you can go there, and it's got links to our hotel portfolio, my coaching program, speaking, books, all that kind of stuff. That's really probably the easiest way. So Larry
Perfect.
Broughton.
Perfect. Thank you.